On December 7, 1941, Cornelia Fort, who was a young flight instructor, was at Pearl Harbor and was up with a student. And suddenly she saw these aircraft coming by with the sign of the red sun. And she realized that they were Japanese, but she couldn't figure out what was happening until one of them started shooting at her. So she quickly took the controls and landed. And 2 days later, they found 2 other civilian aircraft washed ashore with the people that were in it had been shot down and killed.
I woke up that morning and heard these shots and what sounded like bombs dropping, and walked out on the balcony and looked out and saw a bomb drop on Kaimaki, which was a little Oriental community at one side of Honolulu, and saw the flames come up to burn down some houses and everything there, and saw the planes flying, but couldn't see them well enough to know what they were, and went back in off the balcony and turned on my radio, and they were shouting on the radio that we were being attacked by Japan. And so it was a shocker, and that was the beginning of a very scary day.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced.
The world was at war. In Europe and the Pacific, enemy aircraft dominated the skies. America's male pilots were being deployed overseas for combat duty, creating a critical shortage of pilots in the States. With the production of military aircraft more than doubling after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the armed forces needed pilots to test and ferry the new planes to departure points. 2 of the best-known female aviators of the time, Jacqueline Cochran and Nancy Harkness Love, separately proposed the use of female pilots by the military. But in the 1940s, women piloting United States military aircraft was unheard of. As the American role in Europe and the Pacific escalated, the demand for combat pilots became urgent. The shortage of test and ferrying pilots in the States forced the military to consider training women to pilot military aircraft.
There was a great need for people to be available to fly aircraft from the factories as we were cranking them out so fast to support the war effort. And with all the men busy overseas, that was a perfect opportunity for these women to get involved, and they did such a fantastic job.
On September 10, 1942, General Harold L. George, commander of the Air Transport Command, announced the creation of the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron, the WAFs, with Nancy Harkness Love in command. The original 28 female pilots who formed the WAFs became the first women to fly for the U.S. military. But to be considered for service, a woman had to have a minimum of 500 hours flying time, possess a commercial license, and have at least a 250 horsepower rating. Recognizing that not enough women held these flight qualifications, General Hap Arnold, the commanding general of the U.S. Army Air Forces, authorized Jacqueline Cochran to form a second women's pilot program. The Women's Flying Training Detachment was established specifically to train women pilots for the ferrying division. The flying time required for the WFTD started at 200 hours, but was gradually reduced to 35 hours.
When these young girls were getting into flying, they were really breaking the mold, and they found a way somehow to get their license so they could qualify to get into the WASP.
11 months into the training programs, General Arnold decided to consolidate resources and expand the flying duties of all women pilots. On August 5, 1943, the Women's Auxiliary Ferrying Squadron and the Women's Flying Training Detachment merged into the Women's Airforce Service Pilots. With Jacqueline Cochran in command as director and Nancy Harkness Love as executive of the ferrying squadron, the WASP program was born. 25,000 American women, many still in their teens, others into their 50s, applied, all hoping to fulfill their dream of flying by serving their country in its time of need. They came from all walks of life, from chorus girls to farmers' daughters, and from all parts of the country to begin training the Army way. But one of the things people don't realize today is that when these young women took on the challenge to become WASP, they were all volunteers, brave civilians willing to perform very unique military jobs to contribute to the war effort. According to General Hap Arnold, we could not have won the war without them. Out of the 25,000 volunteers, only 1,830 were accepted, and of these, only 1,074 successfully completed the training. Becoming a WASP required extensive Army Air Forces training, and even then, there was no guarantee that there would be a place for women as military pilots. Houston, Texas became the first WASP training site, but training was soon moved to the drier Sweetwater, Texas, where Avenger Field was transformed into the first women-only military flying school in the world.
Of course, it was a very exciting time for all of us. I think we were all anticipating the training that we were going to get. We had been told in advance what was going to be happening out there. And of course, the excitement of just being there and meeting all these people for the first time and going to share the same experience was quite a pleasant thought. The primary thing was that we were all there for one purpose, and that was the love of flying.
The arrangement that we had were our bays had 6 cots, and then there was a latrine with 2 sinks, 2 commodes, and 2 showers. And then there was another bay with 6 cots. So now you have 12 women at 6 a.m. trying to get ready for the day. So we soon learned that you put your zoot suit, which is a coverall, you put your zoot suit on over your pajamas, and you go to mess, and you have your breakfast, and then you come back and do the battle of the latrine. So all of that was quite different than civilian life. But the camaraderie was just great.
I had 5 other females in my bay, and we were all very close. I think you get very close because you don't know if you're going to be alive the next day.
We first started flying Stearman, and they issued us these old men's GI coveralls. Because remember, there had never been any women in the Army Air Corps before, so everything they issued us was for men. And then we were up every morning at 6 o'clock. We had 4 hours at the flight line, 4 hours of ground school, 1 hour of marching, 1 hour of exercise, and anything else they could give us until 10 o'clock at night.
It was exactly like the cadet training for the men, except the men didn't have to have a license or have any flying experience to go in. Most of them just out of high school or maybe first year or 2 of college.
Although all of these women were experienced pilots, training to become a WASP wasn't easy. They had to follow strict Army regulations and prove themselves every step of the way. The possibility of washing out remained one of their biggest fears.
We relied on each other, and we were very good companions to each other. We would, if someone had a problem, we would try to help them out, either in ground school or a problem in flying, and we would go over it as groups. And of course, the bond became tighter. Looking back, I'm sure the pressure was intense in that we all wanted to succeed. Nobody wanted to wash out. And it was very nerve-wracking because we never knew who was going to be next. Hopefully it wasn't going to be you.
It was tough, it was rough. And you could be washed out for a matter that didn't even involve flying. You were caught fraternizing, you were out. You got too many demerits, you were out. And there was no getting around it.
On weekends, we were able to go into town, but we still had a curfew where you had to get in at a certain time. And if you didn't, you got so many demerits for it. And then at night, if you didn't put the lights out at a certain time, and you'd get demerits for that. You'd get demerits for if you didn't have your clothing in the locker right, the way it was supposed to be. And so many demerits, and you were out.
About a little less than 50% of each class did wash out. And I think it is not because they couldn't fly. It's that they couldn't learn at the speed that they wanted us to. So I always felt very sorry for the girls that did wash out.
Early on, the WASP decided they wanted a mascot. They found their mascot in Fifanella, characters in the proposed Walt Disney movie Gremlins. Fifanella were female gremlins, imaginary beings endowed with magical powers and always full of mischief. Pilots often attribute mechanical failure to gremlins, but Fifanella was a good gremlin and meant to bring good luck. The WASP asked for the use of Fifi as their mascot, and Walt Disney generously agreed. The official mascot was worn as a patch on their flight jackets and painted on aircraft. Flight training was tough. The Army used BT-13s to teach blind instrument flying. The rear cockpit was equipped with a curtain that covered the pilot's vision, forcing her to fly by instruments only. Pilots who became overconfident or broke military training rules sometimes suffered heartbreaking consequences.
One day, I was just getting ready to be the one that was sitting in the front, and one of the WASPs came over and she said, "Would you care if I rode with my best friend who had this cover over her head in the back seat?" And I said, "No, I don't care, go ahead." So the next thing we knew, their plane had crashed and they were both in the hospital because they were buzzing a tree or something and hit the tree.
They brought that plane back to a portion of the base, or an area on the base on Avenger Field. And we marched out after dinner that night in file, and they made us look at the aircraft. And let me tell you, it was not a pretty sight. And I think if we ever wanted to buzz again, we'd lost any interest.
Even for experienced pilots, flight training had inherent dangers. Janet Simpson lost her best friend in a mid-air collision.
For some reason, they just didn't see each other. And so Elizabeth jumped, but at 1,800 feet, the chute opened too late. And the one that was in the other plane was killed instantly. And that was my first experience with death. And they wanted me to take her belongings home. And I just couldn't. I said, "Could you find somebody that didn't know her so well?" We all pitched in some money for her burial and to send her home to her parents. And she never got a burial flag or anything. Nothing in those days.
In all, 38 WASP gave their lives for the war effort. Each year, memorial ceremonies, like this sunset ceremony at Avenger Field, are held throughout the United States to remember and honor those WASP who gave their lives while serving their country. Even with Fifi as their mascot, the WASP experienced their share of mechanical failures and close calls.
Well, I guess there must be something about me and first solos. This was my first solo in the AT-6, and I'm approaching my first field where I was supposed to land, and all of a sudden I see smoke and fire coming out of the exhaust. And what went through my mind is I could jump if things get bad, but then they're going to be really questioning me as to what happened, and I might get washed out. I think I'll stick with the airplane. And so I telephoned because I radioed and said I would like to make an emergency landing. And they cleared me, and I landed, and they found out what was wrong with the aircraft. There really was something wrong. They notified the field, and I went back and got over that, and I didn't have to face washing out.
And this one night, about 1 o'clock in the morning perhaps, I took off from Avenger Field, and I was going to San Angelo, which was my first leg, and then I was picking up a new heading and going on to the second leg. Well, I flew into San Angelo, changed my course, and started out, and all of a sudden I had complete electrical failure. And it was fortunately a nice moonlit night, and I said, well, I guess my alternative is that I have to do a 180 and go back to San Angelo, which I did. And when I got to San Angelo, all of the lights were out, just perimeter lights as I remember it. And I remember I buzzed the field, and I came around and buzzed it again, and I landed the plane. And as I landed and started to taxi, a little Jeep came out with the sign behind it, "Follow me." And I followed him back to the flight line. And there was a welcoming committee for me there. And when I got out of the aircraft and stood on the wing, I could hear someone say, "My God, it's a woman."
Throughout each phase of training, there remained the fear of washing out, becoming the empty bunk in the barracks. The pressure increased for each WASP when they did their check flights with male officers.
We had a young lieutenant come back from overseas. He'd been in combat. And he was acting as check flight. We had 2 check flights, actually, civilian and Army, for each phase that we went through. And so he was my final check flight. I had passed the civilian, and now I was going to have the Army check flight. And we sat in the plane, took off, and he put me through different paces, and everything was fine. Finally, he said, "Well, before we go back to the base, let's throw it off into a spin, kick it off into a spin." And I said, "Sir," he said, "a spin." So I said, "Well, I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't." So I kicked it off into a spin, and I tried to pull it out. Nothing happened. I dropped it and tried to pull it out again, and nothing happened. And he's saying, "I've got the controls." And I said to him, "Sir, don't you dare touch those controls." And dumped it again and pulled it out of the spin. And I knew at that point that I had passed. And so when we got down on the field, this little lieutenant, who was very, very quiet at that point, said to me, "Miss Chase, that was a very good flight." But we had been told never, ever to spin a 6. So I could not tell him that when I was up in the air. I knew if he had touched the controls to bring that plane out of spin, I would have been eliminated. I knew I washed out, and I wasn't going to have that for anything. I figured if I had to fly it into the ground, that was going to be it.
These young women continued to break all tradition and exceed expectations, all for the right to become WASP.
I graduated and was assigned to Gunner Field, Montgomery, Alabama, as a test pilot. And I also ferried, and I also instructed. And it was great.
They took their jobs seriously, whether assigned to ferry aircraft, tow targets for live anti-aircraft practice, or test questionable planes. The WASP were excited to perform their duties.
Wherever you were given orders, that's where you had to go. I would love to have been in the ferry command because they got to fly a lot of different aircraft. But it wasn't so. And I was stationed at Pecos, Texas, where they had UC-78s and AT-17s. And those are advanced twin aircraft. And one of my jobs there was engineering testing. When they did an overhaul on an airplane, it had to be flown in a certain manner for a certain number of hours before it was turned over to the students. So that was one of the jobs I did. And another one was flying personnel around the country wherever they had to go. That part I liked very much.
I was going to be stationed at Blackland Army Air Force Base, Waco, Texas. And I was going to be stationed with Nancy, my best friend. And I asked for twin engine. Actually, I wanted to fly B-25s, but I made the mistake of saying twin engine, and that's what I got, AT-10s, which were twin engine. And I reported for duty the next morning and said to the captain, "Sir, I'm reporting for duty as your new test pilot." And he said, "Jesus Christ." And I said, "No, Barry Vincent." And so right away, he was in shock because no woman had ever been in that hangar before. But right away, he got a twin-engine airplane, an instructor, and a parachute for me. They gave me 3 hours of duel, and the instructor said, "There, you're a test pilot. I've taught you all I know about this airplane." So we came in and landed, and I went into the hangar, and I met all the mechanics and talked to them for hours about everything I had to do. And the next morning, I came down to the hangar, and there were 8 AT-10s to be tested, and I tested them just as if I knew what I was doing, and I did.
Ferrying aircraft to their departure points often took them on long cross-country flights. Betty Blake tells us about an experience she had while ferrying a P-39 Air Cobra fighter over the farmland of Illinois.
It was early morning, and I don't know why I looked back. The sun was behind me, and I looked back and saw this black smoke pouring out of the back of the plane. And I should have bailed out. But I think I was at 20,000 feet or something like that. It was an awful long way to the ground, and I looked down a couple times, and I'd look back, and I think there's a little less smoke coming out than a minute ago. I looked back a couple times and thought it was less, or told myself it was, and I made it into the field and landed, but when they pulled the cowling off the engine, it was charred. I don't know who protected me that day, but I was very lucky.
WASP were also assigned to help train Army ground forces by flying searchlight, radar, and strafing missions. One of the more dangerous assignments was pulling targets for live anti-aircraft practice.
Supposedly you had supposed to have radio contact with them, and they would instruct us what they wanted, and you just flew back and forth, and they had tracer bullets, so that we knew if they weren't. We were pretty alert to that, and if you see one of them going in front of you, you get out of there real quick. And these were all young guys, really, 18-year-olds down there shooting those guns, never shot them before, so you never knew what would be happening, and it was dangerous. Even the slow flying was dangerous with those planes, and that target was way out there. But you did what you could, and I liked it. I loved it. I was flying.
My job was to take damaged aircraft and fly them to the depot, which was at Mines Field, which is now LAX, and to pick up repaired aircraft and bring them back, to deliver personnel, to deliver material, to do engineering jobs, slow flights, to fly an aircraft if a cadet said there was something wrong with it, to see if he was right. It was what they called dishwashing jobs, little jobs that had to be done. But it relieved a man for combat, and that was the main goal, was not to replace, but to relieve men for combat.
With the war raging on, more WASP were assigned to ferry aircraft to both coasts for shipping to all fronts of the war. In all, the WASP ferried over 12,000 military aircraft between 1942 and 1944. That's about 50% of every aircraft manufactured in the United States during the war.
They didn't have a lot of men pilots. There were so many of them flying overseas, both in Europe and the Pacific, that they were really short of pilots. So when they really needed planes moved and didn't have men to do it, then they finally thought, well, I guess we'll have to check a girl out in them. And they'd hand you the report and everything, and you'd have to sit at home at night and study that and then go out and fly one. Sometimes they never checked you out in them. You just got in it and flew.
One of the first WASP killed in the line of duty was Cornelia Fort, the pilot who narrowly escaped being shot down by the Japanese while giving a private flying lesson at Pearl Harbor. On March 21st, 1943, while ferrying a BT-13, another plane being ferried by a male pilot struck her aircraft, forcing her to crash. As the WASP continued to prove themselves as reliable pilots, their jobs for the Army Air Forces were expanded. Some WASP were even chosen for top secret missions. By 1944, England was receiving devastating blows from German V-2 rockets. To counter these attacks, General Arnold authorized a secret mission codenamed Operation Aphrodite to develop technology to fly unmanned, radio-controlled aircraft and crash them into V-2 rocket launch sites. Helen Snapp was one of the few WASP assigned to Operation Aphrodite. At first, small unmanned robot planes were used, but testing larger planes required a pilot in the drone to take control if something went wrong. That was Helen's job.
The robot plane that they used most of the time was about 6 feet long, and of course couldn't carry a pilot, and it was a real robot. And then they had the PQ-8s and PQ-14s, which we had to ride safety pilot, and then they had to learn to control too, in the same way as they did the unmanned robot. And we had to learn all phases of it, and we did everything. And it was a lot of fun, but if they got, if the mothership didn't keep close enough to it, they lost control anyway. And that's the reason they wanted a safety pilot in there.
For 2 glorious years, WASP played a vital role in helping win the war, shattering the idea that women had no place in the cockpit of a military plane. The WASP flew 60 million miles in every type of Army Air Forces aircraft and in every type of non-combat mission. Their safety record exceeded that of male pilots doing the same jobs. WASP were trained to pilot everything from the Stearman biplane to the B-17 Flying Fortress. Aircraft similar to those piloted by the WASP have been restored and now appear in air shows around the country. Just like male combat pilots, WASP trained in the North American T-6 Texan, known as the Pilot Maker. A favorite of many WASP was the single-seat P-51 Mustang, a fighter bomber used for long-range missions and to escort bombers in raids over Germany. WASP ferried hundreds of P-39 fighters to the West Coast, where they were brought to Russia for use by the Soviet Air Force. WASP trained to pilot multi-engine aircraft such as the B-25 Mitchell, a twin-engine bomber used successfully throughout all theaters in World War II. WASP also piloted the B-24 Liberator, a long-range, heavy bomber used in both the European and Pacific theaters. WASP ferried the Boeing B-17, by far the most well-known bomber of World War II. The definitive heavy bomber of World War II was the B-29 Superfortress. Several WASP trained to pilot the aircraft and demonstrate its safety and flying abilities to male pilots. The B-29 is most remembered as the aircraft that dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
By early 1944, the Allies had critically weakened the German and the Japanese air forces, and so more American pilots were surviving, and we didn't need as many flight schools to train more pilots. That meant that the pilot flight instructors in the United States were out of jobs, which means they were eligible for the Walking Man's Army. Then they look and they see all these women flying these airplanes domestically, and they decide they want those jobs.
When General Arnold sought militarization for the WASP, the complaints by male flight instructors and returning veterans caught the ears of the press and Congress. A nasty anti-WASP campaign ensued.
It was just terrible. For the men made fun of us and belittled us and didn't like us. The women should stay at home. They should stay in the kitchen.
Well, the media picked us as flighty women, and we had this glamorous job, and it was a waste of public money being used to train them. What could we ever do with flying? I mean, they just said all kinds of weird, horrible things as far as I was concerned. I couldn't believe that people would actually listen to them, but they did, and it caused a lot of problems. I think I had more discrimination from women than I ever did from men.
First of all, our program was an experimental one. They didn't know if women could handle the military life, could handle the aircraft, both the small ones and the large ones. So it started out as an experiment, and we were paid by civil service. But we were promised that if the program became successful, we would be taken into the Army Air Corps. And we even had to sign papers that when we were taken in, that we would continue with them. And in other words, don't take this expensive training and go home.
Now, both Cochran and Arnold wanted the women pilots to be made a part of the Army Air Forces, but Congress opposed it. In June of '44, the House Committee on the Civil Service delivered the WASP a crippling blow. They reported it considered the WASP unnecessary and unjustifiably expensive, and then they recommended that the recruiting and training of all the women pilots end.
Well, we were all excited when we got down there because it looked as if it was going to happen and we were going to be taken into the Air Corps because the program was successful. And then came, well, it's a little bit doubtful, and then finally it was the bill that General Arnold put before Congress was defeated by only 19 votes.
After proving they could handle the latest fighters and the heaviest bombers, it all came to an abrupt end. On December 20th, 1944, they were quietly and unceremoniously disbanded. There were no honors, no veterans' benefits, and very few thank yous.
We were at this Avenger field for the Advanced Instrument course, and we heard that Jackie Cochran was flying in that late afternoon, and of course we were all excited. We were just thinking she was coming for a brief visit. And she landed, and we went up to the flight line. We sat around in a great big circle on the flight line, and she told us that Hap Arnold had deactivated the group that day, and that we were going to be deactivated on the 20th of December. And there wasn't a word that was said. There wasn't a dry eye amongst any of us. And I can't remember even how long we sat there, and then we just simply got up and went back to the barracks.
Well, when we found out we had a letter from Jacqueline Cochran and General Arnold that we were going to be disbanded, we could not believe that we had flown every single airplane the Air Force had. We had done everything that the men had done, and yet they were going to get rid of us.
Well, that was a sad day. I was going to be taking B-25 training, and of course, when they found out we were being disbanded, we were all frozen to our bases. And, you know, we thought we were going to be in there for some time, and it was a crushing blow when we found we were going to be disbanded.
I really kind of felt like we were being fired because we didn't know about the atomic bomb. We didn't know that the war was soon going to be ended. And we couldn't understand why we were being sent home.
It was devastating, but we hoped there would be a last-minute reprieve. In October, we got the official document that said the program was closing as of December the 20th. I don't think at least for myself, I don't think I completely recovered from it. I went on with my life afterwards. It was sort of finding out that a dream can be achieved, but it can be taken away just as easily.
Two of the squadrons, including mine, sent a wire to the president and offered our services for $1 a year for as long as the need existed. It was turned down. They said, no, we've made up our mind. that was a sad ending.
Losing their military flying status forced them back into civilian life. While many applied for civilian flying jobs, even with their advanced flight training and extensive experience, the airlines refused to hire female pilots, instead offering them jobs as stewardesses or as part of ground control. They found themselves grounded. Their dream of continuing as military pilots shattered.
We were devastated that we were just let go like that, with not just saying goodbye, goodbye, you did a good job, because we had none of the benefits. All the other women in the service got all kinds of benefits, college, medical, everything. We got absolutely nothing.
If I'd have gone the GI Bill, it would have changed my whole life. My life would have taken a different turn. Somebody asked me not too long ago, you got the Congressional Gold Medal. Which would you prefer, the Gold Medal or the GI Bill? And I said, I'll take the GI Bill every time. I stress education to the kids I talk to today. Without education, you're not going to be nothing but a dishwasher for the rest of your life.
In the meantime, a lot of the earlier classes were sending out letters, you know, we're going to try to get jobs. And if we can find a job, then we'll notify everybody that these jobs are available. But nothing really developed.
Now what? What are you going to do with all this wonderful training that you've been given? Well, I wrote a lot of letters, and I never heard no said in so many different ways. And it's understandable, because they had these experienced pilots coming back that had a lot more time than I did. And I soon realized that I was going to have to do something on my own.
As the country celebrated the end of the war and began to build a new future, the WASP quietly went on with their lives, raising families and enjoying careers, their contributions during the war never officially recognized.
And they were now starting to make aircraft for civilian use. So I went to the distributor of both Cessna and Aranca and said, can you use my services to bring the aircraft in? They said yes. So I gathered a few pilots and started a little ferrying business. And then that led to my getting a Cessna dealership.
As a way to stay in contact after deactivation, they created an organization called the Order of Fifanella. Originally, it was used to help WASP find jobs and to organize reunions, but later became the nucleus of their political activities to fight for veterans' recognition.
It all started with that first class to graduate, and the big headlines were first woman to fly military aircraft. Well, that upset us a little bit because we were the first women to fly. And we kind of organized after that. We contacted each other. Did you hear, did you see that and all that? What are we going to do about it?
And some of the papers said these were the first women to fly military planes. That's when we said, oh, wait a minute. And we decided to go after our veterans status.
What about us? We had our own sacrifice. We lost 38. Are their sacrifices are going to be for nothing? And that started the drive. And we started to write. And I wrote to congressmen, I wrote to congressmen in other states, I wrote to just about everybody, as all the WASP were. And I learned what politicians do best. They can say no in the most politest ways. We didn't want the glory. We didn't want any of the publication. We wanted our government to recognize the fact we did our bit in a time when the country was at war, in which they asked for our help, and we gave it and gave it willingly, and that's all we wanted, nothing else.
In 1972, a small group of WASP who were getting ready to retire from both the Air Force Reserve and civil service realized that their time in the WASP, those 2 years, didn't count towards their retirement. So they worked to get a bill introduced in Congress to give them recognition for their wartime service. But that bill was quickly killed when neither the Army or the Air Force would accept jurisdiction over the women. This made it clear that the WASP would need to prepare for a long fight in order to receive veterans recognition.
In 1975, I was elected president of the WASP organization. And General Arnold's son, Colonel Bruce Arnold, had come to one of our reunions and said, I'm a lobbyist in Washington, D.C., and I will help you get recognition as veterans of World War II, fulfilling my father's dream. So this all started in 1975, and without his knowledge and his ability to contact the people in Washington, D.C., one of whom was Barry Goldwater, I don't think that we would have gotten the recognition.
In March of 1975, a bill to recognize WASP as veterans was introduced to the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee by Senator Barry Goldwater, but committee chairman, Senator Vance Haught, would not allow the bill a hearing. When an identical bill was introduced to the House Veterans Affairs Committee, their chairman, Ray Roberts, also killed it.
The WASP realized that the only way to convince Congress to grant them veteran status was to prove that they were military. To do so, they orchestrated a dynamic grassroots effort to lobby for their veteran status, building on those earlier efforts of Nancy Cruz and Teresa James. With B. Haydu and Bruce Arnold overseeing the operation, the WASP formed a militarization committee to compile that needed documentation to prove that they were veterans.
Dora Doherty Struther listed WASP accomplishments. Bird Howell Granger gathered proof WASP had been treated as military personnel. And Doris Tanner compared WASP training and compensation with that of male cadets and officers. The documentation was provided to WASP, who would present it to their state representatives.
We called on representatives and senators, and all the women senators were great. I mean, they all backed us for veteran status. Barry Goldwater, who had flown with WASP, he testified for us.
Senator Barry Goldwater's role cannot be overstated. Now, this is the father of modern conservatism. This is the anti-ERA senator. And he is so determined to get these WASP this recognition based on his personal experience flying with them. He calls in all sorts of personal favors, political favors, to try to get this bill passed. And then he goes so far as placing an amendment on every Senate bill just to get this thing passed, just so the WASP can get their recognition. Now, to sway public opinion, the WASP talked to reporters about their military flying experiences, resulting in newspaper articles appearing across the country. Now, one of the great reasons that the WASP were able to get this publicity was because the Air Force and the Navy were coming out saying, look at all these young women pilots that we're going to have for the first time ever, flying military airplanes. And the WASP were able to call those same reporters and say, no, look, here we are. We did it. We did it during the war. Don't forget us. And so the reporters had this great hook that the WASP were able to gain this extra publicity for their efforts.
One of the most interesting stories featured the B-29 Superfortress. What makes the Superfortress story so interesting is that after the test pilots were killed while flying the prototype, most male pilots refused to fly this aircraft. It was considered so dangerous that it became known as the Widowmaker. General Hap Arnold ordered Paul Tibbets, who eventually piloted the B-29 that dropped the bomb on Hiroshima, to train several WASPs to fly the aircraft. They flew it around to combat bases, where male pilots returning from flying the B-17 and B-24 bombers in Europe were now stationed. After watching the women fly the military's largest bomber, the men stopped complaining.
And one thing the WASP did was they coordinated an innovative petition drive to support the bill. Dorothy Davis acquired 1,700 signatures by wearing her WASP uniform to a theater showing Star Wars, and set up a table with pictures of the WASP in action and a poster that read, "Please sign petition for veteran status for the Women Airforce Service Pilots." In total, the WASP gathered some 22,000 signatures of people across the country.
And their cause received national television exposure in November 1977, when Bernice Falk Haydu appeared as the mystery guest on To Tell the Truth.
Number 2.
My name is B. Falk Haydu.
Their lobbying began to show signs of success. On March 15, 1977, the 95th Congress had a historic first when Bill H.R. 5087 to recognize the WASP as veterans was introduced in the House. Congresswomen Lindy Boggs and Margaret Heckler led the fight in the House. It was the first time every female representative in Congress joined together to co-sponsor a bill. But getting the bill passed was still a long shot. Colonel Arnold knew they had to convince Representative Olin Tiger Teague of Texas if the WASP bill was to have a chance to pass in the House.
They still didn't want us to be accepted as veterans, but we put together an album, and the first page in the album was a copy of one of the women's honorable discharge from the U.S. Air Force. It said Air Force instead of Air Corps, but anyway, it was the same thing that the Speaker of the House had. He looked at it and he said, "This is exactly like mine. These women are veterans. I don't think we even needed to go to Congress because we had these honorable discharges." But that's what changed the minds of all of them.
In order to ensure it would not be vetoed, Barry Goldwater made the WASP legislation a rider to a veterans education bill that he knew would be passed. Hundreds of WASP came to Washington in their uniforms to witness the vote. On November 3rd and 4th, 1977, the House and then the Senate passed the legislation. And on November 23rd, without a single WASP present, President Jimmy Carter signed it into law.
And so with our lobbying, in other words, we did in 1977 what they had done to us in 1944, and we were very successful to finally be recognized as veterans of World War II.
I don't think it made much difference then, except it was gratifying that we finally got the veteran status. It would have meant a lot more had we gotten it when we were still in the WASP.
It took another 33 years before the WASP were officially recognized for their outstanding service during the Second World War.
I rise today to speak as if in morning business, to introduce a bill that is sponsored by every woman in the United States Senate. All 17 of us have come together to award the Congressional Gold Medal to the Women Airforce Service Pilots, called the WASP.
And on July 1st, 2009, President Barack Obama signed Bill S-614, authorizing the WASP to receive the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest honor Congress can award to a civilian or a group of civilians. On March 10th, 2010, almost 70 years after the WASP served during World War II, they were finally officially honored by Congress. WASP Deanie Parrish, Associate Director of Wings Across America, accepted the Congressional Gold Medal on behalf of the WASP.
All we ever asked for is that our overlooked history would someday no longer be a missing chapter in the history of World War II, in the history of the Air Force, in the history of aviation, and most especially the history of America.
We did it for love of flying. We just felt, all of us, I think, felt it was such an exciting opportunity to be able to fly all these beautiful military planes that we'd never had any idea we'd have a chance to fly.
It was a wonderful experience, and I can't imagine ever being without it. What my life would have been boring.
I think women who had heard about us, or maybe there were other women like me who had always wanted to fly, and if they heard about what we had done, then it gave them courage to start flying themselves.
I would do it again and again and again. I loved it, every minute of it.